So for the second part of the video, I'm starting with an idea that I had. You can see a water filter here that you can cut open, and then you get this out of it. Part of it is coal, reactive coal, and the other parts are these microbeads that I'm using for blister and pus details. I think they're also called microbeads, and you can get them under that name, but the thing is they are going to be expensive, and those water filters, everywhere they sell those water filters, they will most likely take them back for recycling, and you can just go there and ask them if you can have one of them because you need it for crafting. And the idea here was to also put a few of them on the miniature as blisters. And yeah, you can also get them in see-through apparently, but like I said, if you are going to actually paint them, then you will be fine with those. Here I'm placing a few dummies or armatures for the skulls that I'm going to do in the third and last video. But now we're moving into sculpting the actual overgrowth. And like I said, I didn't have a clear plan on how much I want the stones to be overgrown by this. But in the first step, I'm just laying out the first layer of the material, and I'm actually using I'm actually using Magic Sculpt. I'm always mixing those two up. So Magic Sculpt, an epoxy putty that's self-curing. It's a bit different from the milliput as far as it's less water soluble, and I prefer that if I don't want sharp edges. If I want to go for a more organic feel, then I switch to that modeling clay. And as you can see, I already use a variety of tools, color shapers, ball tools, to create some texture and create the interaction of the overgrowth with the underlying stone structures. So here I'm trying to mimic the creep actually crawling through those stones and crawling up the slopes of that of that shape in the back. Then defining the edges a bit. Just again trying not to stay too regular. In this case I'm putting in something like a tooth or a thorn that's growing out of the creep. And here I'm using the ball tools to push in like those half circles or half spheres into the creep on different locations. And then I'm filling that with a bit of with an orb that I made out of the clay, and those will be the base for my eyes. Later I'm going to put on eyelids, but first I'm leaving this to dry. Just moving the material around the eye out a bit, and then here putting in some of the overgrowth actually creeping up on the stone, and also setting up an exit out of this overgrowth for a tentacle. Just double checking that I'm not covering the area where the marine is standing on, and then you already can see the first tentacle that I'm doing. So just rolling out a piece of clay, making sure one edge is smaller, or one end is smaller than the other, and pushing the thicker end down that exit. Smoothing everything out a bit, blending it together. And then you can play around a bit with that tentacle, sort of looking for something to grab, or you can decide whether it's going to creep under the stone or stay on top of it, or maybe be free hanging, grasping upwards or whatever. You can go, it's all in your imagination really, what you want to do there. You can also glue the miniature on at this stage and then have a bit of an interaction between the base and the miniature, so maybe that tentacle would grab up into the miniature and hold on to it. That could be a nice interaction. Yeah, just making sure it's not covering the spot where the marine should stand on, and then just putting in a little detail. Don't just leave the tentacle as a, don't leave it like the way you rolled it out. Put in a bit of detail, like flatten it on some areas, and it's going to look a lot better that way. Second tentacle, and again I'm trying to go for a bit of interaction, as you can see soon. While I bend it down, I'm also making it interact a bit with the edge of that plinth. It's just a tiny little detail. If you don't want that, you don't have to do it. I just kind of like the way that it's grabbing onto that edge, and then winding around the tooth that we put in there. And to speed things up, I decided to go for also blisters and pus bubbles on the overgrowth, and I'm just taking the shortcut with the microbeads out of the water filter. And you can throw them on randomly, but that's perfectly fine. In this case, I just wanted to put them on in a more controlled way, so where you would have crevices or edges where something could bubble up, I tried to go for those bubbles. Or at least I decided that they are bubbles in that case. Also, I put them on parts where there's some change of texture. So in the areas, you can see that later, where I have larger tentacles coming out of the overgrowth, I put a few of those microbeads. And sometimes I also use them, the larger ones you can also use, of course, for eyeballs. Or at least eyeballs in a nurgle way. I don't know if they would work in sculptures. You would have to try. Again, using those ball tools to create an indent for one of those eyes. Putting in the eyeball. Just rolling out the material as round as possible, which isn't always that easy. Pressing it on, just fitting it into that socket and making sure it sticks. Again, you can do that with a brush, with a wet brush. And then to mix it up, I decided to put in a few larger tentacles that I'm actually going to structure. In this case, it's going to be a tentacle with suction cups. Again, finding the right position first, making it bend a bit. Also, I kind of noticed that this is already more or less, well, it's not more or less dry, but it's more dry than the material I used for the smaller tentacles. You need to experiment and see what grade of drying out works best for you. And here you can see I already put or make one side more flat than the others, and that's the actual side that I'm going to be putting the suction cups on. Again, making the tentacle reach over the edge, that's just kind of my trademark thing. Clearing everything out, putting in maybe a bit of texture, and then I just roll out tiny balls for the suction caps. Suction cups, I'm sorry. Yeah, just putting tiny hole in, pressing it on the lower material, and then refining it a bit with the color shaper. And I'll just show you all the steps that I made there. It's basically the same, but just the arrangement maybe gives you, or is interesting to see. Again, make sure that you are not going too regular, because if stuff is too regular, then that puts us off. Also, if at this stage the material that is below is still a bit soft, it's easier because the initial hole you're going to stab with the needle, you can push a bit further down and connect the ball that's going to make the suction cup. You can make sure that it connects better with the underlying material. Totally up to you how far you want to go. If you just want a few of those cups, that's fine as well. I decided to put a few more on. And later I'm going to show you an example of a different tentacle that is more like a tongue and has a bit of texture like an earthworm. There's a lot of variations that you can do in those tentacles. Just do a Google search and you'll get a lot of examples from nature. Just cleaning up the connection of the base of the tentacle and putting in the last cups. And as you can see, damp or wet brush helps with smoothing small details and blending together parts of clay. And I think that's the last one. Afterwards I'm going to integrate the tentacle into the overgrowth a bit more. Well, I think this is the last one. And like I said, more detail is always better. So I'm continuing the flat side by adding a bit of material on the edge of that flat side to emphasize the flatness a bit more. And like I said, you can check real life tentacles. They're usually, or not always, but usually made up more like a triangle with the round side up, and then the slopes of the triangle coming down, and then the way the muscles form also influences how it looks on the outside, and it's kind of triangular if you were to chop it up. You'll get a more triangular diameter. So that's what I'm trying to mimic here. Again, just adding a tiny bit more of detail. And I'm always trying to stay as close to reality as I can with my sculpture. You can do something completely different, of course, if it suits you more. Just an example of what can be done. Okay, so one of the last steps in this video, I'm actually, after everything is dry, I'm putting in the eyelids. And again, I was looking at the artwork of the nurgle Space Marine in the booklet, and I decided to give a few of those eyelids. That adds a little bit of extra detail that you can paint and play with. Because the eyes are actually going to be black, and you can paint the eyelids a few tones higher or lighter than the rest, and that gives you an interesting contrast. Also, a lower eyelid gives the opportunity to highlight an edge with white, and white and black, obviously the highest contrast you can get. Not actually going for a human eye. That would look different, but just covering the upper parts and a few of the lower parts, or a bit of the lower parts, with some clay and smoothing it out and making sure the edges are sharp. And this is going to look interesting once it's painted. Again, the surroundings, you want to texture them a bit. So if you have a disturbance, an eye coming through the overgrowth maybe, then sort of like circular waves when you throw a stone into water, you would have some distortions in the vicinity. And just trying to mimic that. Again, speaking about texture, just randomly dabbing on tools kind of helps. And there you saw I made another eye. And I made that one different, like I said, mixing it up a bit. No eyelids for this one, just smoothing it out with a wet brush. And again, putting on some of those microbeads just to mix it up and so that it doesn't look boring. Here I took a bit of a larger one and I pressed it into the clay, sort of like the eye next to it. I'm trying to mimic two more eyes, sort of like spider eyes that are just sitting on top of the carapax.